We often think of weeds as primitive, inferior plants that modern agriculture rightfully eliminated. Nuisances that steal water, compete with crops, and deserve eradication. But what if I told you that medieval communities thrived on weeds that required no planting, thrived in conditions that kill modern crops, and packed more nutrition than anything in your supermarket today? Without herbicides, patents, or corporate control, they harvested plants that big agriculture has spent the last century trying to make you forget. In this video, you'll discover 10 medieval weeds that have been deliberately erased. Plants so resilient and self-sufficient, they threaten the entire model of modern industrial farming. And at the end, a truth that will change how you see every ditch and abandoned lot you pass. Before we dig in, let me ask you this. Have you ever been told to spray a plant in your yard, only to learn later it was edible? Or watched food prices spike and wondered why perfectly good wild food is called a weed? That's not an accident. That's the system working exactly as designed. If you've ever felt trapped by supermarkets and supply chains you can't control, hit that like button. It tells the algorithm that we are done being dependent. Now, let's expose what they've been hiding. Number 1. Dandelion, the survival green that refuses to die. Walk through any suburban lawn and you'll see chemical companies selling products specifically engineered to kill dandelions. Herbicides marketed with images of perfect green monocultures, as if a flowering plant that fed Europe for centuries is the enemy. Dandelions, Taraxacum officinale, are one of the most nutrient-dense greens on Earth, and medieval communities knew it. The entire plant is edible, leaves, roots, and flowers. The leaves contain more vitamin A than spinach, more calcium than broccoli, and more iron than kale. Medieval Europeans harvested dandelion greens in early spring when winter stores ran low and fresh food was scarce. They called it one of the bitter herbs, valued for stimulating digestion after months of stored grains and salted meat. But here's what makes dandelions dangerous to agribusiness. They grow everywhere, require zero inputs, and cannot be controlled. Dandelion taproots can reach 10 inches deep or more, accessing nutrients and water that shallow-rooted crops can't touch. They grow in compacted soil, broken pavement, and disturbed ground where nothing else survives. And they reproduce aggressively. A single dandelion plant can produce up to 15,000 seeds per season, each one capable of travelling miles on the wind. For medieval peasants with no access to purchased seed or controlled farmland, that meant guaranteed food. For modern corporations selling fertilizer, herbicides, and patented seeds, that means lost revenue. Dandelion roots were roasted and ground as a coffee substitute throughout European history, particularly during times of scarcity. The roots contain inulin, a prebiotic fiber that feeds beneficial gut bacteria and doesn't spike blood sugar the way starch does. Medieval herbalists used dandelion root preparations to support liver function and digestion, principles that modern research has validated. The flowers were fermented into wine, and the greens were eaten raw, boiled, or sautéed. Dandelions represent something rare, a food source that asks nothing and gives everything. Number 2. Stinging nettle, the protein-rich weed that clothed and fed medieval Europe. If you've ever brushed against stinging nettle, Urtica dioica, you remember it. The leaves are covered in tiny hollow hairs that inject histamine, acetylcholine, and formic acid into your skin, causing an immediate burning sting. Modern hikers curse it. Medieval Europeans cultivated it. Nettles contain up to 10% protein by dry weight, more than most leafy greens. They're rich in iron, calcium, magnesium, and vitamins A, C, and K. In early spring, when winter food stores were depleted and crops hadn't yet matured, Nettle greens provided critical nutrition. Medieval communities harvested young nettle tops before the plant flowered, when the leaves are tender and the sting is mild. Boiling or drying neutralizes the sting completely. But nettles weren't just food. Medieval Europeans used nettle fibers to make cloth, a practice that continued in rural areas into the 20th century. Nettle fibers are stronger than cotton and were woven into durable fabrics for clothing, sacks, and cordage. During World War I, Germany revived nettle fabric production when cotton supplies were blockaded. The plant also has a long history in traditional medicine. Nettle tea was used to support joint health, and nettle preparations were applied topically for various conditions. Modern research has confirmed that nettle extracts have anti-inflammatory properties and may support prostate health. Here's what makes nettles dangerous to the modern food system. They spread aggressively through underground rhizomes, forming dense colonies that persist for decades. Once established, nettles are nearly impossible to eradicate without repeated chemical treatments. They grow in disturbed soil, along field edges, in ditches, and in forests. Medieval farmers didn't see this as a problem. They saw it as abundance, a perennial green that returned every spring without planting, provided protein and fibre, and required nothing but the knowledge to harvest it safely. Nettles offer a time-tested answer. Number 3. Purslane, the omega-3 powerhouse. Growing in your driveway cracks. Purslane, Portulaca oleracea, is classified by modern agriculture as one of the most troublesome weeds in vegetable production. It germinates rapidly, produces thousands of seeds per plant, and thrives in hot, dry conditions where cultivated greens wilt. Medieval gardeners didn't fight it, they ate it. Purslane contains more omega-3 fatty acids than any other leafy green, up to 400 milligrams per 100 grams of fresh leaves. That's more than many fish oils. It's also rich in vitamins A, C, and E, along with magnesium, calcium, potassium, and iron. The succulent leaves have a slightly salty, lemony flavour and a crisp texture. Medieval and ancient Mediterranean cultures used purslane extensively in salads, soups, and stews. The Greek physician Galen recommended purslane for cooling the body, and it appears in medieval European herbals as both food and medicine. Purslane was brought to North America by European colonists and quickly naturalized, spreading across gardens, fields, and waste ground. By the 20th century, it was being sprayed with herbicides as an invasive weed, despite being one of the most nutritious plants available. The reason is simple. Purslane doesn't need to be planted, watered, or fertilized. It just grows. In cracked pavement, in garden beds, in drought, in heat. Purslane is a warm season annual, but it produces seeds so prolifically that it effectively reseeds itself year after year. The seeds can remain viable in soil for decades, germinating whenever conditions are right. For medieval communities, that meant a reliable source of fresh greens throughout the summer when other crops were still maturing. The entire plant is edible: leaves, stems, flowers, and seeds. The seeds can be ground into flour or eaten whole. For modern homesteaders and preppers, purslane offers something rare: a nutritional powerhouse that requires zero effort to establish and actively resists eradication. If you're looking for food security that doesn't depend on seed companies or perfect growing conditions, purslane is already growing in your driveway. You just need to recognize it. Number 4. Lamb's quarters, the forgotten grain and green that outperforms spinach. Lamb's quarters, Chenopodium album, is one of the most common weeds in North America and Europe, and one of the most nutritionally valuable. Medieval Europeans knew it as fat hen or wild spinach, and it was a staple green vegetable before spinach was widely cultivated. The leaves contain more protein, calcium, iron, and vitamin A than spinach, along with significant amounts of vitamin C, manganese, and potassium. But here's what most people don't know. Lamb's quarters is a close relative of quinoa, and it produces edible seeds that were harvested as a grain by prehistoric Europeans. Archaeological evidence shows that lamb's quarters seeds were a major food source in Neolithic Europe, before wheat and barley became dominant. The seeds are small, similar to quinoa, and can be cooked as a grain, ground into flour, or sprouted. Medieval peasants continued to harvest lamb's quarters seeds during times of grain shortage, and the greens were eaten throughout the growing season. The young leaves are tender and mild, similar to spinach, and can be eaten raw or cooked. Older leaves develop a slightly stronger flavour but remain edible. Lamb's quarters grows aggressively in disturbed soil, gardens, and agricultural fields. A single plant can produce tens of thousands of seeds, and those seeds remain viable in the soil for decades. Modern agriculture classifies it as a noxious weed because it competes with crops and can't be controlled without herbicides. Medieval farmers saw it differently. It was free food that required no planting and thrived in the same conditions as their grain crops. When wheat harvests failed, lamb's quarters provided both greens and seeds to fill the gap. The plant is remarkably adaptable, tolerating drought, poor soil, and a wide range of climates. It germinates quickly and grows rapidly, outcompeting many cultivated crops. For modern men concerned about food security, lamb's quarters represents a dual-purpose plant, a leafy green more nutritious than anything in the produce aisle, and a grain crop that reseeds itself without effort. Medieval communities didn't need to choose between greens and grains. Lamb's quarters gave them both, and it still grows wild across every continent where humans live. Number 5. Chickweed, the winter green that grows when everything else dies. Chickweed, Stellaria media, is a low-growing plant with small white flowers that most gardeners recognize as a persistent weed. It germinates in cool weather, grows through winter in temperate climates, and forms dense mats that smother other plants. Modern agriculture fights it with pre-emergent herbicides. Medieval Europeans harvested it as a winter green and medicinal herb. Chickweed is tender and mild-flavoured, with a taste similar to young lettuce. The entire above-ground plant is edible: leaves, stems, and flowers. It's rich in vitamins A and C, along with calcium, magnesium, potassium, and iron. Medieval herbalists valued chickweed for its cooling and soothing properties, using it both internally and topically. Chickweed poultices were applied to skin irritations, and the fresh plant was eaten to support overall health during winter months when fresh food was scarce. Modern research has confirmed that chickweed contains saponins and other compounds with anti-inflammatory properties. But the real value of chickweed is its growth habit. It germinates in fall, grows slowly through winter, and produces abundant foliage in early spring when almost nothing else is available. In medieval Europe, chickweed was one of the first fresh greens after the hungry gap of late winter. Chickweed spreads both by seed and by rooting at stem nodes, forming dense colonies that persist year after year. The seeds remain viable in soil for years, germinating whenever conditions are favourable. For modern food security, chickweed offers something unique: a cold season green that requires no planting and actively grows during months when gardens are dormant. While you're waiting for spring crops to germinate, chickweed is already producing. Medieval peasants didn't have greenhouses or imported lettuce. They had chickweed growing wild in fields, gardens, and along pathways, providing fresh greens when nothing else could. Number 6. Plantain, the first aid plant. Growing in every lawn, Broadleaf plantain, Plantago major, and narrowleaf plantain, Plantago lanceolata, are two of the most common weeds in North America and Europe, and two of the most useful. Medieval Europeans called plantain waybread, meaning bread of the road, because it grows along pathways where nothing else survives and the leaves are edible. Young plantain leaves are tender and slightly bitter, similar to dandelion greens, and can be eaten raw or cooked. Older leaves become tough and fibrous, but remain edible when cooked. Plantain leaves are rich in vitamins A, C, and K, along with calcium and iron. But plantain's real value is medicinal. Medieval herbalists used crushed plantain leaves as a poultice for wounds, insect bites, stings, and skin irritations. The leaves contain compounds called iridoid glycosides, particularly orcubin, which have antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory properties. Modern research has validated what medieval healers knew through practice. Plantain promotes wound healing and reduces inflammation. During centuries when antibiotics didn't exist and minor infections could turn deadly, plantain was a frontline treatment. Plantain grows in compacted soil where most plants can't survive. Lawns, pathways, driveways, parking lots. The deep taproot breaks through hardpan and accesses water and nutrients below the surface. Plantain tolerates mowing, foot traffic, drought, and poor soil. It produces thousands of seeds per plant, and those seeds remain viable for decades. Medieval communities didn't cultivate plantain. They didn't need to. It grew everywhere humans walked, providing both food and medicine without effort. For modern men concerned about self-sufficiency, plantain offers a skill that's more valuable than stockpiling: the ability to treat minor wounds and inflammation using a plant that grows in every lawn and vacant lot. Medieval soldiers carried plantain knowledge, not plantain plants. The plant was already wherever they went. When supply chains collapse and pharmacies run out, plantain will still be growing in the cracks of your driveway. Number 7. Wild garlic and wild onion, the flavour and medicine that can't be eradicated. Wild garlic, Allium ursinum, also called ramsons, and wild onion, Allium vineale, are aggressive perennial plants that spread through underground bulbs and bulbils. Modern agriculture classifies them as noxious weeds because they contaminate grain crops with their strong flavour and can't be killed with standard herbicides. Medieval Europeans prized them as essential flavouring, medicine, and springtime food. Wild garlic and wild onion are rich in sulfur compounds, including allicin, which have antimicrobial, antiviral, and anti-inflammatory properties. They contain vitamins C and B6, manganese, and selenium. Medieval herbalists used wild garlic and onion to treat infections, support cardiovascular health, and improve digestion. Modern research has confirmed that Allium species support immune function, reduce blood pressure, and have antimicrobial effects. But the practical value of wild garlic and onion is their resilience and abundance. They emerge in early spring, often before the last frost, providing fresh food when gardens are still dormant. The leaves, bulbs, and flowers are all edible. The flavour is strong, pungent, and unmistakably onion or garlic. Wild garlic and onion spread aggressively through bulb division and aerial bulbils, small bulbs that form on the flower stalk and drop to the ground, sprouting new plants. Once established, they form dense colonies that persist for decades and resist eradication. Medieval farmers didn't fight this. They harvested wild garlic and onion from field edges, forests, and meadows, using them to flavour otherwise bland grain-based diets. For modern homesteaders, wild garlic and onion represent a permanent, self-renewing source of flavour and medicine that requires zero inputs and actively resists control. Number 8. Mallow, the survival food that fed refugees and armies. Common mallow, Malva neglecta, and other malva species are low-growing plants with round scalloped leaves and small pink or white flowers. They're classified as weeds in modern agriculture, but were cultivated as vegetables in medieval Europe and ancient Mediterranean cultures. The leaves are rich in vitamins A and C, calcium, magnesium, and mucilage, a soluble fibre that soothes the digestive tract. Young mallow leaves are tender and mild, often compared to lettuce, and can be eaten raw or cooked. Older leaves become slightly slimy when cooked due to the mucilage content, but remain nutritious and edible. Mallow was eaten by peasants, soldiers, and refugees throughout European history. The Roman writer Horace mentioned mallow and chicory as common foods of the poor, and medieval records describe mallow as a staple green during times of famine. The seeds are also edible and were sometimes ground into flour or eaten whole, often referred to as cheeses because of their round, flat shape. Medieval children ate mallow seeds as snacks. Mallow grows in poor soil, tolerates drought, and reseeds prolifically. The seeds remain viable for years, germinating whenever soil is disturbed. Mallow spreads along roadsides, in gardens, and in agricultural fields, forming dense mats that suppress other plants. Modern agriculture fights it with herbicides. Medieval communities harvested it as free food. For modern preppers, mallow offers a reliable, mild-flavoured green that grows without effort and provides soothing, gut-friendly nutrition during times of stress. Number 9. Dock, the iron-rich green that survives anything. Curly dock, Rumex crispus, and other dock species are perennial plants with long, lance-shaped leaves and deep taproots. They're classified as noxious weeds because they spread aggressively and compete with crops. Medieval Europeans harvested dock leaves as a pot herb and used the roots medicinally. Young dock leaves are edible and rich in vitamins A and C, along with high levels of iron and other minerals. The leaves have a tart, lemony flavour due to oxalic acid content similar to sorrel. Older leaves become bitter and tough, but can be cooked to reduce bitterness. Medieval herbalists used dock root preparations to support digestive health and liver function, and modern research has identified compounds in dock root with anti-inflammatory and antimicrobial properties. Dock roots contain anthraquinones, which have mild laxative effects and were traditionally used to support regularity. But the real strength of dock is its resilience. The taproot can reach several feet deep, allowing dock to survive drought, poor soil, and repeated cutting. Dock tolerates cold, heat, and compacted soil. It grows along roadsides, in pastures, in gardens, and in waste ground. Dock produces thousands of seeds per plant, and those seeds remain viable in soil for decades, germinating whenever conditions allow. Medieval farmers saw dock as a persistent green that returned every spring without planting and provided iron-rich nutrition during late winter and early spring. For modern men concerned about long-term food security, dock represents a perennial green that can't be killed, won't quit, and provides critical minerals when other food sources fail. Number 10. Chufa, tiger nut. Now we come to the most suppressed plant on this list. Chufa, Cyperus esculentus, also called tiger nut, yellow nutsedge, or earth almond, is classified by modern agriculture as one of the world's worst weeds. University extension offices publish bulletins on killing it. Chemical companies sell herbicides specifically engineered to eradicate it. The USDA has dedicated federal resources to studying how to destroy it. Yet for 6,000 years, Chufa sustained entire civilizations. Ancient Egyptians demanded it for their journey into the afterlife. Medieval Europeans cultivated it in Spain, where it became the foundation of horchata de chufa, a traditional drink still produced in Valencia today. Chufa produces small tubers underground, similar in size to chickpeas. Those tubers contain up to 10% protein with all essential amino acids, high levels of healthy fats, including oleic acid, the same fat found in olive oil, resistant starch that feeds beneficial gut bacteria without spiking blood sugar, and 4 times the fiber of most standard fiber sources. Chufa is rich in calcium, magnesium, iron, and potassium. It's naturally gluten-free, dairy-free, and allergen-friendly. You can eat it raw, roasted, boiled, ground into flour, or blended into milk. Medieval people understood intuitively what modern research confirms. Chufa is one of the most nutrient-dense foods on Earth. But here's why Chufa terrifies industrial agriculture. It spreads through underground rhizomes, forming networks that regenerate even after the visible plant is killed. One plant can produce 75 tubers. Each tuber can survive in soil for years, sprouting whenever conditions are right. Chufa requires no fertilizer, no pesticides, and no machinery. It survives drought that kills wheat and corn. It grows in poor soil where modern crops starve. And once established, it's nearly impossible to eradicate without repeated chemical treatments. That regenerative capacity, that resilience, that refusal to die, is exactly what made it valuable for 6,000 years. Its survival perfected. But for industrial agriculture, which demands monocultures of patented seeds that force farmers to buy new seed every year, Chufa is a threat to the entire business model. Medieval Spanish farmers cultivated Chufa because it produced abundant calories in harsh conditions and stored indefinitely without refrigeration. The tubers can be dried and kept for years, then rehydrated by soaking in water. Modern research from Valencia shows Chufa yields can rival or exceed traditional staple crops in favourable climates, with high caloric output per acre. Studies on human subjects who replaced modern wheat with heritage crops including Chufa have shown increases in antioxidants, decreases in inflammation, reduced insulin and glucose levels, and improved metabolic markers. Medieval people didn't have the scientific language, but they knew Chufa kept them strong, healthy, and independent. Here's the pattern that connects all 10 of these plants. Medieval communities understood them as part of a self-sustaining food system, not products you buy every year. Plants that reseeded from natural propagation. Plants that required no fertilizer, no pesticides, no purchased inputs. Plants that thrived in poor soil, drought, and disturbed ground where cultivated crops failed. Plants that kept communities fed when supply chains broke down, and they broke down regularly. We traded that resilience for control. We traded free food growing in every ditch and field edge for dependence on supermarkets and chemical suppliers. We traded plants that provided nutrition, medicine, and flavour without effort for a food system that poisons the same plants and calls them weeds. The medieval system wasn't perfect. Harvesting wild food required knowledge and labour. But that system fed Europe for 1,000 years without petroleum, without synthetic chemicals, and without a single person going bankrupt because a corporation sued them for saving seed or harvesting a plant that grew on their own land. The question isn't whether medieval weeds were better. The evidence is overwhelming that for everything except corporate profit, they were. The question is whether you're willing to break free from the system that makes you pay for food that's growing wild outside your door. Food that's more nutritious, more resilient, and more independent than anything in your grocery store. If you're done being dependent, if you're ready to learn what our grandfathers knew before corporations convince them to forget, hit that subscribe button. We're exposing the systems that trap you every single week. Drop a comment and tell me which of these 10 medieval weeds you've seen growing wild near you. This isn't just about plants. It's about reclaiming the knowledge that made communities self-sufficient. The wisdom that big agriculture spent a century trying to bury. Medieval people knew something that modern agribusiness desperately wants you to forget. Real food doesn't need a barcode or a patent. It just needs recognition, respect, and the refusal to stay on your knees.